Hi, this is Catherine Croft from the C20 Society, and you're listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild, and today we visit Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It's home to Frank Lloyd Wright's skyscraper, the 19-story Price Tower. We'll talk with new owners Macy Snyder-Amatucci and John Snyder about their plan to bring the tower back to life. Then it's on to Washington, D.C. and the new administration's plans for architecture with writer and critic Ian Volner. Next, we talk with historian Bill Cotter about World's Fairs. Believe it or not, they still exist. Finally, we close with another lovely track by jazz pianist Lenore Raphael. And now, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. Can we talk about AI, which is rapidly becoming a part of our lives? Architects are slowly, quietly embracing AI to streamline their workflows and boost efficiency. But the ones I talk to want to remain super secret anonymous and don't want to admit they use AI. They're a bit embarrassed, as if relying on the technology is a creative weakness, like admitting you use a calculator to add up things. They love the speed, but there's an unspoken theme that design only really comes from the soul, not an algorithm. AI for design, however, is totally rockin'. It automates tedious drafting, does 3D modeling, analyzes building performance, optimizes energy efficiency, and allows architects to focus on the creative and client-facing aspects of their projects. All of this reminds me of the 1980s, when CAD came out. That's not a term people even use much anymore because it's ever-present and taken for granted and used in nearly 100% of architecture firms except the very oldest guys who never adopted CAD to begin with. CAD means computer-aided design, and it allowed architects to design things on a computer. Oh, the howling! Oh, the hand-wringing! Oh, the complaining that occurred when CAD came out. It was the architecture apocalypse, the end of vision and creativity as the profession knew it. And that didn't happen. And CAD ushered in a new generation of architects like Zaha Hadid and Norman Foster, whose firms created wildly imaginative buildings all over the world. Funny thing, it was the same kind of resistance going on now with AI. So architects, relax. It's going to be okay. AI is not going to kill your intuition and artistic vision. At least the architecture AI. The rest of it, like Skynet and the Terminator, is probably going to kill us. But at least we'll have wonderful buildings left behind. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Bartlesville, Oklahoma is home to Frank Lloyd Wright's 19-story Price Tower. Once a bold beacon of innovation built for the H.C. Price Company, the tower has seen decades of glory, neglect, reinvention, and more recently, a change in ownership. Macy Snyder-Amatucci, a Tulsa native, mom of 3, and president of Beautiful Hospitality, decided to bring the Price Tower back to life with her father, construction veteran John Snyder. They've committed $10 million to restore and reimagine it as the Price Tower Hotel and Residences. It blends Wright's visionary spirit with modern-day hospitality while preserving the tower's distinctive design. George caught up with Macy Snyder-Amatucci and her father, John Snyder, to find out more.
Macy and John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Tell me a little bit about the basic history of the Price Tower, because for people that are not from that area, they might not have heard of it. They know of Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, but how did this tower come to be?
So Frank Lloyd Wright designed a building similar to this back in the 30s, 40s, something like that in New York City. And I don't know if it was not doable financially or whatever, or couldn't get anybody to buy into it to actually build it. So he came across a guy named Harold Price in Bartlesville who owned basically the pipeline company that did all the pipeline work for Phillips Petroleum in Bartlesville. And the guy had plenty of capital. And before this, the Price Tower, he designed the Harold Price house in Bartlesville that Macy and I actually spent an evening with the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy team when we were trying to win the Price Tower out of bankruptcy. And so we were getting on the same page with how they wanted everything done and how we wanted everything done. We all kind of came together in the Harold Price house. And so I guess Harold Price, way back when, was very happy with his house that Frank Lloyd Wright designed for him and oversaw the construction of and all that. And so they decided to do a office building for the Price Pipeline Company in downtown Bartlesville. And the thing, it took 2 years to build, and it opened in 1956. And then Harold Price's office is still on the top floor, fully furnished. His apartment, 2-story apartment that he and his wife had in the Price Tower is just like the day he walked out of it. All the original furniture and the books and everything else.
Even the appliances up there are original.
In the construction business, we would say it's in situ, it's kind of like undisturbed soil. It just hasn't been touched and messed with. And that's exactly what the top 3 floors of the Price Tower was and is now.
Was the building designed to be apartments or offices or what? What was its function?
Let's see, on the north side of the building, right above the entry, are 2-story apartments. And that includes the 2-story apartment that Harold Price had that's fully furnished. And I believe there's, 8 of those?
8.
Yeah, so it's a 19-story building. So there's 8 of those apartments. They're all 2-story. They were occupied from the very beginning. Bruce Goff actually had a 2-story apartment there that he lived in. And then he had his design firm in the building, and he did a lot of design work for Harold Price and a lot of the other families there in Bartlesville. And he designed and built Shinnecock, which burned down, I don't know, around 2005, 6, something like that. Basically, it's 4 pods, and 1 pod on the north side is all apartments originally, 2-story, super cool, all period enamel colored, green and orange appliances and, period tile and all those kind of things. Windows, everything hasn't ever been touched with, thank God. And then the rest of the building, other than the bottom 2 floors, the bottom 2 floors was kind of like meeting space and everything. Now it's an art gallery. But the rest of the building was made up of like dentist offices and doctor's offices, advertising companies. So the rest of it was an office building. So it was mixed-use residential office building in Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
And when Price's company closed in 1981, I understand that Phillips Petroleum took it over for about 20 years and used it for storage. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then in 2000, Phillips donated the tower to a nonprofit that tried to transform it into a destination for Frank Lloyd Wright fans. Did they do anything to the building?
Well, they actually did. I mean, that was 2004, I think. And the CEO of Phillips Petroleum bankrolled the whole deal. And they completely redid the whole building, scaffolded the outside. I mean, I don't know how many millions of dollars they spent, but I'm sure it was at least $5 million plus back in 2005, but they put a 19-room boutique hotel in it. They fully tricked out the first and second floor for the art gallery, put a restaurant on the first floor of the Price Tower. Then they put a restaurant up on the 16th floor, a 2-story restaurant bar. And then they put the 19 hotel rooms in and then refurbished the balance of it in the office space. But they put all new electrical, reworked all of the elevators. There were 4 elevators working, and they reworked 3. They abandoned 1 to make way for a shaft to run data cabling, additional water lines for the HVAC system. So basically, it was a mechanical chase. We're doing a full modernization on the elevators. That's about $1 million item right there on top of everything else. We're going to spend probably close to $10 million on what we're going to do to the building. But yeah, they totally redid the building. all new piping, copper piping run everywhere. I thought when we bought the building, I started kind of going through it all. I thought I'd have a bunch of steel screw piping, that kind of gets clogged up and, people say it has lead in it, those kind of things. But as I started like opening up some access panels under the sinks and everything, it was all repiped in copper, which is a really good thing. Yeah, it was done first class. I mean, I don't think they really cared at the time how much money they spent. They did not replace the boilers, which I thought was kind of odd, but the boilers are all from 1956. They did abate it. They pulled the asbestos insulation off and all those kind of things, but the boilers are still there. And we are going to put new boilers in it. And so we're kind of working with the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy team out of Chicago on some of the protected areas and how we'd like to change a couple of those. Believe it or not, the boilers in the basement are on their protected list. So they want to know if I can get those removed in one piece. And so they can maybe display those out somewhere on the property so people can see them. I mean, the doors and everything they're pretty cool. But I could definitely get the doors off. I don't know about the rest of it.
It is important to add that they didn't touch any of the original finishes or design of the building. Mostly just the mechanics of it that were
right. So we do a lot of this historic renovation. And it's kind of like, you go buy a house that's designed by a competent architect, Frank Lloyd Wright house or something else. And I mean, the worst thing anybody can do is do an add-on or kind of change what the architect starts with a blank piece of paper, and they're super talented and they know the look, the feel, and what they want. And they, you got one chance at it and it gets built, and you don't want somebody to come in playing around with it, and screwing it up. And so on the Price Tower, nobody, even to this day, went in and screwed the building up. I mean, they didn't like demo walls out.
That's great.
They didn't play with the windows. They didn't play with the copper exterior or anything like that. So it's really untouched. It's just the guts of it, the mechanical, the electrical that you don't see was redone. And it was redone right. We have a great slate to work with. And I tell people, it's not a renovation. And I didn't really kind of understand that until I was in the Harold Price house with the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy folks. And then I saw how they redid the Harold Price house in Bartlesville. It's not a renovation, it's a restoration. So it's like you go buy like an old Shelby Mustang or something like that, that's a barn find or something like that. I mean, I don't know how many of those are out there anymore, but you don't go in and like polish up all the rims and sand the car down and paint it and redo all the upholstery. You just go in, just kind of wipe it down, fix it, clean it up, and leave it patina, and that's what we're going to do. And there won't be one sheet of sheetrock hung in that building. It's all conventional stucco plaster, metal lap with cement layer, and then a plaster finish. And so anywhere where we're going to disturb that, we'll put it back and you'll never know that we were even there.
Macy, when this nonprofit took the place over and got funding to do all that work and ran it as a hotel and a restaurant, that was successful for a number of years. What happened to them? Why did they go out of business? Why did they want to let go of it?
I think it was probably just a matter of lack of revenue.
Okay. Did the pandemic get them or something? Was that what caused them to finally let it go?
Well, maybe that did hurt it, but I think a lot of it was just a lack of revenue over the years. Maybe, there was some cost control issues or maybe some inexperience with, the industry that they were marketing to.
Okay.
But I definitely believe that it's a gem, and it's sad that they weren't able to make it work.
So the next step in this story is in March of 2023, a group called Copper Tree purchased the building from the nonprofit for $10, assumed its debt, and started to redevelop the property. And that's where things started to go a little haywire. What happened?
To get a building for $10 is a pretty good deal,
Yeah.
Especially that building. We've gotten some good deals on some of our projects, but we've put a lot of money, time, and effort in to make them successful. And so I think it just continued to snowball into debt and lack of revenue and lack of cost controls and some deferred maintenance that maybe they didn't have the capital. But if it wouldn't have gone through these phases, we would have never ended up in the situation we're in, where we're going to be able to breathe life back into it and bring it back to life.
Yeah, you guys are going to be great stewards of this. That's really clear. The building made the newspapers around the country when this group, Coppertree, evidently took some of the fixtures out of the building and sold them. What was that all about?
I think, again, lack of revenue, desperation, maybe. I think also there's just a passion you have to have for architecture, design, history, to really value like everything that's inside that building. And maybe it was a lack of that, but there are definitely artifacts missing. And, that's unfortunate. The good news is there are still some really valuable artifacts in there that will be able to still attract visitors from all over, not just to come stay in the hotel, but also to see the artifacts there.
Yeah, I understand that the Conservancy is trying to track down some of those things that got sold and see if they can get them back.
Yes, we're working with them, obviously, to try to return everything back to the Price Tower. Obviously, we hope that we're successful and, we're working with them and we'll just kind of see what happens. I mean, we've only taken possession of the building a little over 30 days ago, and we really didn't even know for sure that we were going to get it until the week of the closing. We really wanted this project. We really believe in it and value, what it means and everything about it. So I think the fact that we worked a year to try to purchase the building, there were points, especially towards the end, where you almost just believe that you're not going to get it because you don't want to be let down. We were definitely in shock when we actually got the keys that day and were able to walk into it. And, we're still going through, the Conservancy's done an inventory before we took possession of the building and closed. They had come and done an inventory. So they're aware of what's there. We're aware of what's there today.
That's great.
So moving forward, it'll be protected, but we will try our best over the next, however long it takes to get those artifacts back.
John, how long do you think it will take to complete this next phase of the building's life?
We've told everybody 2 years. And so that started 45 days ago. So, we're burning off some time. But yeah, 2 years is not a problem at all. But what happens in these buildings, it was a model when it opened that worked, but people's lifestyles and the economy and things like that change, and a building needs to change with it. And so for the last several years, it was pretty much a flawed model because like it is now, and even in Oklahoma, especially in Bartlesville, Phillips Petroleum has laid off a lot of people. They have a lot of vacant office space. There's a lot of vacant office space in other buildings that Phillips Petroleum doesn't own. Just hard to lease office space. And so the model needs to be changed. And so what we've done here at the Mayo Hotel, and we've tried to do on other projects that we have, is we have like half hotel, half apartments. And so that's what is going to unlock the problem with the Price Tower and turn it into a super successful building. We're going to put back the 2-story apartments for sure. We're going to basically leave the 19 hotel rooms. There's a couple of them that are 2-story. They're a little tricky because the stairs are kind of scary for older people, including myself. But for an apartment, it's fine. So we'll take some of those furnishings from the existing hotel and populate those into some of the vacant office space. And then all the rest of the building are going to be apartments. And so, it's kind of a Del Webb concept where it's probably going to be more catered to older people, 60 years, 65 years and up, from maybe the East Coast or the West Coast, that kind of want to get away from the hustle and bustle of where they are now. Maybe they have a dog, maybe they're living by themselves, those kind of things. And so that's the market that we're going to go after once we kind of get off and running. It's the same model that we have here at the Mayo Hotel. We have 76 apartments, and then we have 102 hotel rooms. It's a 300,000 square foot building. That's a big, 22-story building and all that. But the majority of our apartment residents are all seniors, and they pay their rent on time
or empty nesters. We have a lot of empty nesters.
They like amenities. They like the coffee shop. They like the
safety, security,
and the service and the safety and the parking and things like that. So that's what we're going to bring. We're going to bring our tried and proven Mayo model to the Price Tower. And there's not a doubt in my mind that it's going to be overly successful. It's really going to turn out super nice. Bartlesville's kind of like a planned community that you would see, kind of like the Levitt towns of the years ago, up in the Northeast. The whole town is that way. I mean, there's not one piece of trash on the ground. Every yard's mowed. Place is clean. I mean, I should have moved to Bartlesville. These 2-story apartments, you have probably all seen pictures, but you do not understand how cool and unique. I mean, I've taken some people up to these apartments, and I mean, they freak out. They're like, this is the coolest thing. I have never even been in anything like this. The copper on the outside of the building is also inside those apartments, up on the balcony part of those apartments. So, I mean, there's nothing like that. All the triangular shape. I mean, everything's triangular. The drains outside of the building, the carport, all the air vents. So I think also there's going to be a draw for people to have these apartments simply for the architecture and design that Frank Lloyd Wright has.
Well, this sounds amazing, and I'm so happy that you guys also will be operating the building as well as putting it together, because that means that you'll have an integrated, caring approach to this all the way down the line. Please invite me to the opening party.
Yes.
Maybe you can get Luke Bryan to show up and do a concert for you.
Definitely.
Thanks so much for talking with me. Best of luck to you.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's George with Macy Snyder-Amatucci and John Snyder trying to wrangle an invite to the Price Tower Hotel grand opening. What's up with our president and architecture? Well, we know he likes gold, and he's going to build a ballroom on the White House with private funds, which really is a good idea. Some of his other ideas? Well, we'll talk with writer and critic Ian Volner, whom you've read in The Atlantic, Paris Review, and most recently, Art Forum. Ian Volner has degrees from Columbia University.
Go Lions!
And NYU.
Go Violets!
He is the author of several acclaimed books, including Michael Graves' Design for Life, and This is Frank Lloyd Wright. George started his interview with Ian by asking about a nice neighborhood in New York.
Ian, before we get started on architecture, you were telling me earlier about a little place I'd never heard of before called Bronxville in New York, which is supposedly the richest zip code in America?
It is, I think, in certain years as measured solely by home value, which doesn't necessarily speak well to the pace of construction in the New York metropolitan area. We could probably have moderated those if we gave people more options. But then again, the houses around Bronxville really are exceptional. I don't know that many of them are modernist in character. In fact, I can't think that there are many major modernist ones right there. The town itself being on a kind of Tudor model. I think a lot of the houses, certainly the ones that you can see from the center of town, look like they're more in keeping with that stylistic stratum.
And where is it exactly?
It is directly between the nearly or equally affluent communities of Scarsdale. Well, it's just north of Scarsdale and Hartsdale, which are also remarkably tony. And it is just slightly south of White Plains. White Plains, which has been growing rather rapidly. The development in Westchester County, that's among the few bright spots, is the volume of multifamily construction I saw passing through en route to your event yesterday was really astonishing.
So you and your wife use Bronxville as a date destination. How does that work?
Yeah, it says actual Bronxites. That is the Bronx, not to be confused with Bronxville. We're about equidistant between Union Square and Bronxville. It's 20 minutes one way or 20 minutes the other by train. Consequently, when we don't feel like running into friends, we go north, and we feel like having more of a conventional night in the town, we go south.
Well, that is really cool. I'm looking up Bronxville on Wikipedia, and there are a bunch of people that have been associated with that town. Frank Abagnale, who was with Catch Me If You Can. Dick Clark, host of American Bandstand and The Pyramid. We've also got Brendan Gill, famed New York writer.
Yes, that's right.
Rose Kennedy, Joseph Kennedy, a bunch of the Kennedys.
Yes, I believe there's a Kennedy Place right near the train station.
Yep, Eddie Rickenbacker, World War I fighter pilot and later president of Eastern Airlines. And the town was the setting for Jerome Kern's 1917 Broadway musical Love of Mike, and also has appeared in different movies. So it sounds like a fun place to visit, and you go there and see movies and have dinner and go back home, right?
Oh, yeah, we think all the hip kids will be heading there soon enough. We feel like we've discovered it, but we're not that eager to let the secret out. You're telling me a great deal about Bronxville that I didn't know. All we knew was what the restaurants and movie options are within the 4-block radius of the train station.
Well, I invited Ian on the show because of an article I saw of his in Art Forum. where he started talking about architecture and how it's come into the culture wars politically. How did you start looking into this? Because this is a great story that has kind of unfolded, I think, since the middle of the first Trump administration. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. As it happens, I had already written about it during the previous administration, the previous Republican administration. I wrote about a draft version of the order when it first emerged. I did a story on that for Architectural Digest, and then followed that up with a still longer story after the executive order was officially promulgated later that year, immediately before the end of the year in 2016. That piece was in Art in America. So I had an extensive background covering this topic. It's obviously been covered by almost every other architecture writer with any kind of platform to talk about politics and policy issues. Ergo, when it resurfaced in the current Republican administration, I was already well versed in it and had a perspective, I guess, that I thought I could share that, well, I wanted to broaden the conversation beyond merely the immediate implications of the executive order to look at some of its cultural aspects and the cultural adjacencies that appeared to be connected with it.
So what was that original executive order?
The original executive order was rather more forcefully worded. The basic wording said that classicism would be the preferred style for all federal buildings henceforth, that the federal government, through its primary developer and landlord agency, the General Services Administration, would look to build classical buildings. It was rather vague in its definition of what constituted classical buildings, although it attempted to sort of mount a capsule history of pre-modernist architecture. It was very different in character from the order as it's been reissued. The present order is a little subtler. It sort of shows the evolution between the first iteration of this administration and its return to power. The first one, probably, in addition to the fact that it was issued immediately before that administration was leaving office, which rendered it sort of useless, its wording was such that it was unlikely to be able to be deployed even if they'd had more time. This one, well, it broadens the number of preferred styles. It refers more to traditional architecture and suggests that might be Gothic or Georgian or a number of other different stylistic flavors. And what's more, it attempts something that bureaucratically is a great deal subtler than the first time around, which is to have GSA inquire with agencies about what buildings are on their books, to look for opportunities to build new classical buildings rather than just issuing a mandate outright, and to look for opportunities to deaccession existing modernist buildings. This is, from a purely legal perspective, a little bit more intelligent, though only slightly more so.
Well, where did this come from? Because Trump wasn't talking about this on the campaign trail. Who generated this platform?
No, and as has been noted by countless observers, when the president was in the private sector, he was not known chiefly as a builder of classically oriented buildings. He was known as a builder of, well, whatever kind of buildings the moment seemed to call for or the balance sheet seemed to require. He himself was seldom really involved with direct architectural decisions, except in a couple of notable instances. The now president was involved in selecting Dare Scott to design his eponymous tower on Fifth Avenue. And he personally, and I have actually seen the letter, the actual holograph letter signed by him and sent to Philip Johnson, that brought Johnson into the redevelopment of what was the Gulf Western building in Columbus Circle, which Philip Johnson reclad, essentially. Johnson went on to do additional buildings for the Trump organization in an array of styles. But certainly in those first few instances, the now president showed himself to be more of a modernist in inclination. So it may be regarded as something of a surprise that as president, he's responsible for this turn towards classicism. But of course, it's not coming from him, as is so often the case in this administration. It comes from whoever happens to be whispering in his ear or ears immediately next to his. And in this case, it's a sort of an array of different cultural actors headed up, especially by a guy called Justin Shubo of the, for heaven's sakes, now I'm going to forget the name. It's the National Civic Arts Society.
National Civic Arts Society, yes.
Yeah, NCAS. Justin Shubo of the National Civic Arts Society, the NCAS, was the author of the original draft order during the first term and now has resurfaced as the primary champion of the reconfigured order in this term. There are a number of people in and around its orbit who are supportive of this position, the position being not merely that classical or traditional architecture should be preferred in the construction of government buildings, but that preference should be codified in law, and that it should be done in such wise as to actually be a detriment, not just merely to the development of new buildings in a non-traditional architectural mode, but actually to the detriment of existing non-trad, non-classical, non-Gothic, or whatever buildings in the federal government's portfolio, in GSA's actual operating list of buildings that it currently has.
Yes, there's a webpage for the General Services Administration called Assets Identified for Accelerated Disposition, where at least 2/3 of the buildings on there are modernist buildings, including the HUD headquarters designed by Marcel Breuer.
Yes, that's right. That list has gone through a couple of different versions over the last couple of months since the revived order was issued. The initial list was far, far longer than the one that appears online now. It ran to perhaps hundreds of different properties. That list was only online for the space of a couple of hours. Some member of the Musk troop jumping the gun. It was then pulled down and has reappeared, as you note, in its present form, where it's been steadily added to, and you can see the accretions by date that are currently on the list. Most of these properties were on the list as it previously was. It appears that they are continuing to add to it. We don't know precisely how many they're going to add to it. On the whole, it certainly appears that they are being more discriminatory with regards to modernist buildings that they're now looking to deaccession as compared to the original list, where it was pretty indiscriminatory. There were lots and lots of buildings that I would not typify as being modernist. Just the same, a number of non-modernist buildings are also slipping onto the current list. And some of those modernist buildings, at least a couple of them that I've identified, don't have National Register protection. And even if they did, I mean, that doesn't necessarily entail any meaningful landmarks protection. No, almost nothing.
I was really surprised in looking at this list. Some of these were beautiful classical buildings, like the United States Courthouse, Customs House in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I mean, gorgeous building.
Yeah, that's right.
The kind you'd think the NCIS would be rallying to save.
In that instance, the Custom House building actually, it's important at all instances because this administration and its defenders are so nitpicky on precisely these points. The Custom House building has been targeted for deaccession by GSA for many years. It's a little bit superfluous. It's not quite adequate with the present needs of the federal government. So it's hard to lay some of these targeted buildings solely at the feet of this administration. On the other hand, the Custom House buildings does, I think, have some Philadelphia landmark status, which would probably protect it. But it does show just how careless they're being because they don't actually care one way or the other. The fact is that the GSA historically, this is sort of part of a loose line in its mandate, is meant in the event that it does deaccession a building, which as a matter of course may have to do and does do with some frequency. If the building is on the National Register, GSA is supposed to ensure, as a matter of covenant, that whoever acquires it, whatever private sector or other, they're also meant to, by the way, prefer public sector buyers of federal property so that civic buildings can continue to have some kind of a civic role. But regardless of who acquires it, GSA usually attaches a covenant that says you have to keep the building's historic elements as they are. There is no certainty in the present reorganization of GSA that they're going to continue to honor that tradition. There's no certainty, given the volume of buildings that they're trying to get rid of, how would they be able to? They're going to have to get these buildings to the highest possible bidder as soon as humanly possible. And of course, they're threatening to flood the United States commercial real estate market with hundreds of thousands, millions of square feet that they will need to somehow make attractive to prospective buyers. Very few of them are likely to be public entities. So no, I think that buildings like the Customs House and others, even ones that have nominal landmarks protection, indeed are in danger of being sold to unscrupulous buyers or simply falling into neglect window, but they don't find any buyers at all.
I've said in this show many times that all the modernists that I talk to are fine with classical architecture. They love it as much as they love modern. But you talk to this certain line of classicists like the NCAS, and they have all kinds of justifications why modern should be done away with. What are some of their reasonings?
Well, my favorite reason of theirs that they frequently cite, that's so amazingly specious, is the popularity of traditional architecture. Now, to some degree, this is a sound enough argument. NCAS and others insist on sort of gilding the rhetorical lily here by going out and commissioning study after study, these very, very, I think, methodologically questionable surveys that ask the average American what kind of architecture they prefer, and then come back saying, see, everybody wants trad. I have no doubt, having been a critic and a writer about architecture for my entire adult life, that there are plenty of people out there, a lot of people that I speak to, even many people who are themselves makers of or involved in the creation of modern architecture, that they have a fondness for traditional architecture that sometimes clashes with what they would appear to present themselves as preferring professionally. There's, of course, the famous case of Philip Johnson, who, despite creating like the first really robustly international style house in the United States, the Glass House in New Canaan, actually spent a great deal of his time when on the property in the old farmhouse immediately up the hill.
Yes.
That supposed hypocrisy actually, I think, speaks more to what you're saying, which is that modernists tend to have a soft spot for traditionalisms that certain varieties of traditionalists don't appear to have for modernism.
Yeah.
What's more important, though, in considering this argumentum ad popularum, or whatever it is that the traditionalists suppose themselves to be advancing, is that there's no way to account, if traditionalism is so overwhelmingly popular as compared to its modernist or contemporary alternatives, there's no way to account for, well, the most important phenomenon in contemporary architecture and one of the most important phenomena in contemporary urban culture, which is the so-called Bilbao effect, the capacity of avant-garde buildings to have a regenerative effect on cities. Now, there has been much overstated about the Bilbao effect. Some communities have tried to build avant-garde buildings and have not seen the kind of economic and media boom that Bilbao, Spain famously did when it commissioned the Frank Gehry Guggenheim there that opened in 1997. But just the same, I can point to a dozen odd examples from, what was the one I was just in Dallas, one of the traditionalists' least favorite architects, Tom Main's science building there. That one attracts flocks of visitors, all of whom stand around photographing its exterior. The High Line, although the park itself, which is indeed very much contemporaneous expression, the architectural elements by Dillo Scofidio Renfro, but also all of the contemporary apartment buildings that have been built there by a cavalcade of modernist stars, including Jeannie Gang and Zaha Hadid and Thomas Heatherwick. The people vote with their feet as much as they may vote on these supposed rather dubious surveys circulated by the NCAS. There is an unquestionable popularity, at least for the novelty and the visual interest of contemporary buildings, even if they're little understood by some. And I don't think that you can just wave that away by saying, as some of the traditionalists do, oh, that's just because people are being fooled by cultural elitists who are presenting them something new and compelling and weird. That's not quite it. The innovative, the daring, people are attracted to that, even if, yes, if questioned about it off the cuff and using leading questions, as the NCAS is prone to do, they say, yeah, I just want, some with a gable roof and a chimney. What's a big deal? So my feeling is that argument is thin at best.
We can look back to classic structures like the TWA terminal at JFK, which has been repurposed as a hotel, and also airport design in general around the world. This is where modern architecture is, this is the heavyweight championship about who gets these commissions for airports and museums that are designed to inspire and tell us about the future and bring people in. And most of them really do.
And contemporary culture, whether we like it or not, again, there are plenty of critiques we can make of the Bilbao effect and of the kind of visual spectacle for which that so many contemporary architects seem to shoot for in those major kinds of public commissions like airports. You cannot dispute the effect. In a mediated culture such as ours, where everybody documents the dramatic moments of their lives via Instagram and other forms of social media, those are the buildings they're taking pictures of. Some folks may still like to go see the oldest Cape Cod house in New England or something like that. There are log cabins in Western Kentucky. But when it comes to the things that actually enthuse the public about architecture, their traditional sentiments notwithstanding, contemporary architecture, daring architecture that, as you say, inspires us to see what's new and what's possible, still remains popular. And so I think that argument that they mount is certainly not satisfactory to qualify this an administrative move as heavy-handed as this order.
What has been the AIA's response to this, the professional organization that represents many architects?
Well, it's been consistently opposed to this effort. Certainly the NCAS and other supporters of the order claim that the AIA and other major professional organizations are intrinsically modernist inclined. There's some truth to that, only to the degree that a disproportionate number of contemporary practitioners do contemporary buildings. But the AIA has very carefully worded its objections in order to not alienate its own membership, a portion of which does in fact do traditional or traditional inflected buildings, in order to say that the problem here is the style by fiat approach that the administration is pursuing, not the style itself.
It overlooks the idea that architecture, like everything else, evolves, right? I mean, we're not going to work on horseback anymore.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think that when it comes to the fundamental wisdom of the approach embodied in the GSA's previous order of battle, which was determined, I guess, in the early 1960s by then fairly young Daniel Patrick Moynihan, that the federal government would not pursue any one official style, but would instead attempt to engage new and emerging practices, attempt different things in different places. There's a fundamental virtue in having government be a force for innovation and have a government that, as we are meant to be a democratic government, makes pluralism key to its strategy and architecture, as in so much the rest of its cultural policy. That still leaves plenty of room for traditional buildings on occasion when appropriate, but makes certain that the accent to some degree is on innovation and, yes, not have buildings that look like we still live on horseback all the time.
If you want to see more about this, you can Google Daniel Patrick Moynihan's Guiding Principles for Federal Architecture. Ian, thanks so much for talking with us. I really enjoyed meeting you at one of our U.S. Modernist events and hope we cross paths again, perhaps in Bronxville.
Yes, I'm certainly looking forward to it. We'll have to go to a movie there sometime.
That was George with author Ian Volner. From the space-age optimism of 1964 New York to the global unity of Expo 67, World's Fairs promised us a bright future. Jetpacks, dome cities, robot kitchens, and monorails, while also shaping everything from architecture to transportation. Author and archivist Bill Cotter is one of the foremost World's Fair historians. He's written about fairs in New York, Seattle, San Diego, and Chicago. Bill has spent decades preserving more than 30,000 images and rare materials from around the world, sharing them with educators, researchers, and fans. Thanks, Bill. Here's George's conversation with Bill Cotter.
Bill, before we start talking about the World's Fair and architecture, I understand you have a favorite TV series, Zorro. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I watched Zorro when it was on for its first syndicated reruns about the late 50s, and I really was hooked on it. I think the stories themselves were really good, but I thought Guy Williams was just masterful in playing the hero. He was kind of tormented. He wanted to take care of all the villainy in the Pueblo, but that really kind of wreaked havoc with his social life and his home life. His dad was all upset that Don Diego wasn't riding off to do things, and we have to rely on Zorro, not realizing they were the same guy. So I like the fact that Guy really brought, I thought, great pathos to the role and showed the turmoil of how he would like to tell the lovely senorita who he was, but he knew he couldn't. There were a lot of great stunts in it and the sword fights and everything, but I really liked the Guy Williams, the human side of Zorro that he portrayed.
And is that old series on anywhere still?
It's on Disney Plus right now. And
Okay.
It was one of those ones that wasn't on at first. I still work as a consultant to Disney, and I think they get tired of me bringing up Zorro all the time. How come Zorro's not on TV? How come it's not on Zorro Plus? How come it's not on the Disney Channel? So we got it on Disney Plus. I'd like to see it remastered in HD and put out on a physical media set, but I'll keep pushing.
Well, let's talk about the World's Fairs. A lot of people have never gone to one. Certainly, we haven't had very many of these in the last 50 or 60 years in the United States. So what is the World's Fair exactly?
World's Fair is a great chance for a country or a city to show off the best of what they have and let the rest of the world come in to try to show the best of what they have or what they think the world will be. So they really started with the first one in the Crystal Palace exhibition in England, where England, is always Britannia rules the waves and the king and queen of the world. They weren't really with to show that besides their military might, they had all this industrial might. So they put on this giant exhibition and showed off the latest inventions, the newest steam train, the most advanced muskets, everything you could think of. And that became the big central theme of World's Fairs. You have an awful lot of industry really driving them. You'd like to think it's just all the governments getting together and showing what's great about our country, but that takes money, and companies have more money to spend on this than most governments do. So you have companies coming in, and Otis exhibiting his brand new safety elevators. And, even like at the 64 World's Fair, all the new stuff was going to come, picture phones and undersea hotels and all the rest of it. So it's a great showcase to show what you have today. But more importantly, I think where they become a big, exciting thing is to get people excited about the future. Try to say what we have today is exciting, but tomorrow is going to be even better, and sell us some optimism, which I think the companies then hope raises their stock price, that sort of thing.
What are some of the notable buildings that were erected for World's Fairs?
Almost every World's Fair gets a theme structure. So in Paris, you had the Eiffel Tower, that sort of thing. In New York, you had the Trilon. One of the big ones that's still getting a lot of attention today, of course, is the Space Needle, Seattle, 1962. So those are the sort of things that are left there permanently. But a lot of the World Fairs come up with temporary exhibits. There's a group in Europe called the Bureau of International Expositions, the BIE. And they were formed back in the 20s or 30s because everybody was having World Fairs. And it would be one of those things, say, Germany wants a World Fair, Austria wants a World Fair, Italy wants a World Fair. Well, how could you exhibit at all those World Fairs if you were one of the companies? And how could you get audiences to come if you couldn't afford to go to them all? So the BIE was formed as a sort of a check valve on the proliferation of World Fairs. And they have a couple simple rules. One is that World Fairs will run for 6 months. And it's interesting, if you try to run for 6 months and 2 days or something, you have to go and get an exemption from the BIE. You also can't charge your international exhibitors rent for their space. They have to pay to build their own pavilions, but you don't charge for the dirt that's underneath them. There are certain size exhibitions. So a country can only get a world-class Class 1 exhibition every 10 years. They put these things together, and in most cases, the World's Fairs are left to pretty much do what they want. So in some cases, they come up with a common architectural theme. So we'll build these great palaces out of steel and concrete, cover them with plaster to make them look real great. Others, like Expo 86, Vancouver went with a pre-built modular type of architecture to make it a lot cheaper and easier for countries to exhibit. So most of the pavilions are built, and then 6 months later, they're torn right back down, which is a tremendous expense because you have to meet all the zoning codes and safety requirements for the 6 months it's going to be in operation. But to me, it's sort of fascinating to see what some of these companies and countries build, knowing 6 months later it's going to be reduced to scrap metal. It just kind of makes it easier for the architects to come up with something that's so totally wild and wacky that you could never, ever sell a company for building it for long-term use because it may be too hard to maintain or, lack the functionality for the space. But just let's say for 6 months, what would you like to do? You'd like to build an upside down building? You'd like to build a building that looks like pine trees? Yeah, let's go off and do that. And to me, that's one of the things I really enjoy is the craziness of the architecture.
Well, the architects were really clamoring to get these commissions. For example, Bucky Fuller did that giant dome in Canada, which I believe is still there, right?
Yeah, the dome is there. The plastic framework is not on it anymore. That burned off in a fire. But the geodesic dome is still there. And it's called the Biosphere. And it's open during the summer months. In winter, it's just too cold. But they have a really nice exhibits there on the ecology and the need for mankind to be more mindful of his environments. But yes, it's still the same framework from 1967. He had another geodesic dome earlier at the 64 World's Fair, which was simply called the Pavilion. That's still in Flushing Meadows, again, without its covering on it, but now it's a giant aviary. So, geodesic domes were, of course, going to be the big thing, and we were going to have them all over our cities and climate-controlled weather. It didn't quite work out. But, Bucky's dome is still there.
And, of course, in Flushing Meadow, you've got the Philip Johnson Towers. They're still in existence?
Yeah, the New York State Pavilion is really interesting because when they were building the fair, Governor Rockefeller was determined it was going to be the highest structure at the fair. And you can only go so high. anyway because you're right in the flight path of Flushing Meadows Airport. But he made the edict that nothing was going to be any higher than the New York State towers. And you could see it from pretty much across the fairgrounds. But they never planned what they were going to do with it after the fair. So the thing was built, and then the New York State was pretty smart. They just donated it to the city of New York, whether you want it or not. And that took out any expense that the state would have to tear it down or anything like that. So it was used for a number of years for a rock concert. You had the Grateful Dead and other groups performing there. It became a roller rink, and then it was abandoned and just sat there for years and years of decaying. It was so sad. I went back about 1971. I was in the area and I drove into the fairgrounds. And the fair hadn't been gone very long at this point in time, 7 years. And the Tent of Tomorrow, the big structure at the center, you got the three towers, but the main structure is called the Tent of Tomorrow. They were using it to store garbage because there was a garbage strike in New York City and they had no place else to put it. So this beautiful pavilion, which, was a beautiful showplace with people doing bands and performances and dance acts and everything. And now it's got 14 feet of garbage stacked in it. That was really, to me, emblematic of the woes of New York in the early 70s. But the pavilion is still there. They are stabilizing the towers because part of what they had was you had wooden pilings underneath the towers, and over the time they've started to rot. So the tent itself was kind of askew, bricks coming loose and things. So they decided they better go and stabilize the towers before they fall down, and that's what they're currently doing. You'll see them all surrounded in scaffolding now. No plans to open them up to the public that I know of because they don't have the elevators in them anymore, and they're certainly not ADA compliant. But every time I go back to New York and I see them there, I'm just 12 years old again, remembering the way they looked during the fair.
America had such a great presence at all of these World's Fairs for years and years and years, about 100 years mostly. And then what happened? Why did we stop?
The 1984 New Orleans World's Fair was the thing that really stopped the issue. New Orleans was the only World's Fair that I know that declared bankruptcy while they were running, and they needed federal help to keep the lights on, which would have been a real embarrassment to the United States if all of a sudden they had to shut this thing down early. The paychecks were very much in danger of not going through. So after that, a lot of the people in Congress and the Senate started saying, why on earth are we putting money into a World's Fair that benefits one city? So if you have a World's Fair in New York, that does a great thing for New York. But say you're the senator from, Ohio. What's it doing for your constituents? You're the congressman from North Dakota. I want the federal money to come up here and build stuff in my area. So they actually passed a law saying that the United States was no longer fund World's Fair exhibits, and they dropped out of the BIE. They had already made the commitment at that point in time they were going to be going to Vancouver. So they were kind of stuck with that one. But after that, they said no more federal money. So since that point in time, the United States' exhibits have been raised by private funds and a lot of corporate backing to have a U.S. pavilion. And I think it really shows. I remember when I went to Scuba 85 in Japan and going to the United States Pavilion, I felt like I was an ad for Texas Instruments and Coca-Cola. Lots of stuff on the computers and how they're going to change the world and come on outside and have a Coke. But there was nothing in there that really said what made America great. There wasn't anything on the diversity of our people, the beauty of our national parks. Again, if you weren't one of those two big companies, you were pretty much left out. I keep trying to joke with people. At times I'll go to World's Fair and I almost want to say I was a Canadian because the U.S. exhibits have really been sort of lackluster because, again, we don't put money into it. No money in, no good product out.
In recent years, what countries have put on the most kick-ass pavilions?
Oh, it's really been kind of surprising over the years. I think one of the countries that really surprised me, starting back in the 60s, was Czechoslovakia. The country doesn't even exist anymore, but they had a great pavilion at Expo 67. It was one of the really well-attended ones, had a great restaurant. But they had incredible artwork. They did a lot of stuff in glass pieces and not just the sort of glass that you would put in your house, but kind of crazy glass sculptures and that. And they've done some things at other fairs. In more recent years, it's really hard to say. It seems like sometimes somebody will have a really good pavilion at one fair, and then the next one, again, becomes kind of lackluster. one of the issues on these things, if you're going to do a World's Fair, you usually have to start 4 to 6 years in advance to work on this. And most regimes of governments don't last that long these days, unless you're the king or queen of some country and you're there for life. But, most other countries have an election and people come and people go. And it's like here in LA right now, we're getting ready for the next Olympics, which I'm not real thrilled about. It's just going to cost us a fortune. And the mayor that put it into effect is not even going to be the mayor when the thing comes into be. So a lot of times the World's Fair comes along and sometimes these countries reserve space and start paying the money to have a building design. But then when it comes down to the exhibits inside, they really don't know what to do. I mean, matter of fact, that happened way back in Brussels in Expo 58, the first post-World War II fair, and everybody wanted to show that they were doing really well. And we had the big Cold War going on. So the United States did this great pavilion. Edward Darrell Stone did this building with a suspended ceiling with a massive amount of space inside. And then they realized they didn't have a lot of money left for the exhibits. So you head over to the USSR pavilion. You had Sputnik and their satellites and everything were up there. And the United States was showing fashion models coming down a ramp and, spinning around to show our latest clothing designs. Luckily, Disney came up with an exhibit that kind of saved it. But that was the sort of thing, you can build the building, but people don't stop and think. The show inside has to really be the compelling part, because otherwise people won't come back.
We haven't had major shows really in the U.S. I mean, we had New Orleans, which was not that big, right? And we had Knoxville, which was not that big. But most people have not experienced a major one in their lifetime, like the ones that were in New York and Seattle, because that was so long ago.
Yeah.
But they have experienced Epcot in Florida. So how did that get started? How did Disney turn the World's Fair idea into Epcot?
Well, that's a long story. And I was at Disney. I was working there at the time all that took place. So basically, Walt Disney had the idea of doing the theme park in Florida. And the Magic Kingdom was great. But he always wanted to do Epcot. And Walt's version of Epcot was totally, totally, totally different than the version that we actually built. I mean, Walt had the idea of a futuristic city. And if you go and look at the films he did and the models and everything, it was always laid out where you had the Spencer City with the big tall towers and all that. And then outside you had the green belt area with housing in it. And you had the Wedway people mover going out. So basically you wouldn't have to take your car into the city. You could just go on these spokes going out into the people mover and go on in, nice, clean, non-polluting sort of stuff. The trouble that Walt didn't seem to anticipate, if you build a city and you put people in it, the people get a right to vote, right? So if you say that we want to put this in there and it's all going great, and all of a sudden the people in the city said, I really want to paint it pink. Okay, now it's painted pink. And the people in the next neighborhood say, I want mine to be purple, or we want to do and change anything. And that becomes the part of the problem. You can design a utopia, but once you put people in it, and those people start deciding, I don't want to pay taxes for that anymore, or I don't want to do this, or I want to do that instead, it became a real issue. So at Disney, on our property, we had a very small area of housing for employees. We had a whole corporate, a governmental type agency, and there were about 30 people that lived there. But they were all employees, and I think if they all knew, if they decided, hey, we're going to vote to paint this thing orange, they're not going to be working there anymore.
Right.
So, yeah, we had to come up with another idea. So now, we had the Magic Kingdom. It kind of reminded me, back in the days of the 64 World's Fair, Walt had proposed an exhibit to Ford, and that they were going to put people in a Ford and drive them through it, as the memo said, the 12 wonders of the world, whatever we decide they may be. Well, that was the thing with Epcot. We're going to invite you to Epcot, whatever we may decide that will be. And it didn't turn out to be Walt's.
And that Ford project became Test Track, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, in a way, Ford wanted a pavilion for the World's Fair, for the 64 Fair, and they had fired about 10 to 12 different design companies. And Walt had gone out to General Motors and said, I'd really like to do a pavilion for you for the 64 Fair. And they said, no, that's thanks. We're already working. I've been working on it for about a year or two, and we're going to do our own Futurama too. But you might want to go down the road and talk to the people at Ford, because they're really stuck, which is just amazing. Because could you imagine Ford and GM helping each other out? So Ford had one unnegotiable demand for their attraction, was that people had to ride through it in a Ford. Because they had done that at the 34 Chicago World's Fair. They had done it for the 39-40 World's Fair. And they wanted people to be in a Ford and get real excited about Ford cars and, go off and buy one. So that was the problem everybody else was having. How do you do a show and put people in a Ford? It has to be a big show to fit, a lot of cars. That's where Walt came up with the idea of the Magic Skyway and taking you back through the days of the dinosaurs and all. So that was just a wonderful design thing that they did to try to incorporate Ford's one and only demand.
One of the best tours I've ever done was, I don't even know if they do this anymore, was called Keys of the Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where you got to see that Epcot, for example, was really built on the second story, and there was a level underneath it of service tunnels and other things.
Yeah.
How did that all get designed? I mean, someone had to do that.
Well, it's a pretty easy way to think about it, because if you go to Florida and you dig a hole, it's going to fill up with water. The water table in Florida is pretty much just below the surface of the ground. So if you wanted to go and build a facility there, and you have to put a basement in it, because some things need basements. You're going to have, say, the Haunted Mansion. A lot of the mechanics and everything are hidden down out of sight. So if you dig a hole, it's going to fill up with water. And if you then have that issue, you've got to waterproof the basements, drain the basements and everything. So somebody came up with the great idea of, why don't we build the basement on top of the ground, put everything in there that we need to put in, and then build the city above that, and just put dirt covering up the basement so nobody realized that when you get off the ferry boat to go into the Magic Kingdom, you're walking up a ramp, and what you're doing is climbing up all that dirt up to the top of the basement to go walk around. And then down below, what's called utilidors, and it's a great nickname for utility corridors. And that was a great way to put all the plumbing and the pipes and the garbage collection system. Again, all things Walt wanted for his modern city. He didn't want garbage trucks running around. Everything would be hauled away in a giant pneumatic tube. But it was also a nice way that you didn't have somebody that was working in Fantasyland have to walk all the way down Main Street in a Fantasyland costume and ruin the design look of it, that they can just all of a sudden pop up a staircase and you're in the middle of Fantasyland, and for aesthetics, not ruin the look.
I think that World's Fairs are a source of fascination for so many people. I'm certainly one of those.
I was growing up, my uncle worked for New York Telephone, and he was putting all the payphone systems in at the World's Fair. And he was talking about these, all the crazy buildings that, we just did this building and it's built like this. We did that building, it's built like that. As you drove by the construction site, you could see all these, weird buildings going up. I'm an electrical and computer engineer by trade, so I have no mechanical or civil engineering or whatever. But I just really got a kick out of, where else do you go to a fair that, has these particular things? They had a big phone booth shaped like a giant bubble, and it was a big speaker phone. And you could go in and drop your dime in and talk to your aunt and say, hey, we miss you, come out to the World's Fair. We'll see you on Saturday, sort of thing.
Thank you so much, Bill, for talking with us.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
That was George with World's Fair historian Bill Cotter. Finally, she's back, and we couldn't be happier. Lenore Raphael returns to the show, an extraordinary pianist often compared to the late Oscar Peterson. Over the years, she's built an impressive career as a jazz pianist, composer, radio host, and educator, with a resume that sounds like a tour through the Jazz Hall of Fame. Lenore's albums, A Beautiful Friendship and Blues for OP, just to name a few, highlight her deep connection to the piano and her unmistakable swing. Here's Lenore with Darn Dream.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 25,000 significant modernist houses, and access 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Got a guest to suggest for the show? Write her at bobby@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guile. George and I will be back soon with another naturally intelligent edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.